that on. And which split screen? New space. Perfect. Okay. I'm glad to see as many people here this morning. So we've got we got some stuff to cover today. The main topic today is about handling side effects in React. So that's what we're going to focus on. But I also want to take an opportunity to kind of review, maybe if we can, as we're doing it, we review some stuff. So I want questions to be asked about things that might look familiar yesterday. I also want to, based on yesterday's material, there are, without a doubt, things lacking from some of the early exercises yesterday. And I want to maybe call some of those out, talk about them, and make sure that we clear some of that up, because that can easily be fixed for the next cohort. But it can also, at least be patched up a little bit for you. So I'd show, maybe after this lecture, we could actually talk a little bit about that. Kind of up to you. I'm going to, put some time into that today. But in terms of effects, if we're going to talk about this, we all kind of know how components work right now. I know it's still pretty confusing, but what would we say is the number one responsibility of a component? Like, what is the number one purpose of a component? What is it there to do? I know it's hard to, you might be thinking about it, oh, that's a big question in general, right? But let's try talking about it. It's a function that does one specific job. That's great. It's important that there's single responsibility. But what is their one responsibility? Sorry? The whole position of HTML? I'm not sure. Composition. Oh, composition. Yes, right. So we build up a tree of DOM nodes that end up being rendered in the browser just like any of our HTML would. So yeah, for sure. So we use components to compose these different pieces of the DOM together. But I would say, you want to share?
I was going to say that their role is to basically figure out what piece of like a tree to give to the DOM.
Yes. This is what so if you'd ask me that question, my answer would be the responsibility of a component is to return React elements. So React.create element, it creates elements and it returns them. And that is the responsibility of all components. Of course, there are some that will return null because they don't have any visual part. But let's say, just for this, because we're thinking about core React, all components are meant to return React elements. That is their responsibility. But that is not all we need to do with UIs, right? This is something that comes up where when a component loads, we might need to do stuff that is not returning DOM elements or parts of that tree. And so those are called side effects. That's what we're going to call those things. Is anything that a component does that is not returning React elements is a side effect in React. Okay? So that's our definition for what side effects are. Is anything that happens within a component that is not returning React elements. Okay? Now, I've got a bunch of different side effects on my list here. This is my notes for this lecture. It can fit on here, right? But that doesn't mean it's easy stuff. We're going to use a hook called useEffect today. So we had useState yesterday. The second hook in sort of the list of kind of complexity or usefulness being useEffect. And all of these side effects are going to be handled through the use of this useEffect hook. Because what it allows us to do is separate our side effects from our components so that it does not interfere with the returning of React elements. Like this, we cannot let the side effects stop or slow a component down when it has to return things. OK, so here's what I mean by that. Let's say we have an operation we want to do when our component loads, because that component's data does not exist within the client application. It exists on an API server somewhere. OK, so that's our data is on a server somewhere. We have a client, and our component, when it loads, needs to make a request to that server to get the data. Does that make sense? OK. So it's not necessarily a button click that this is happening on. Sometimes that happens. We click a button and then load some data. It's a different kind of side effect. What we want to do is handle side effects that are a result of a component rendering. When a component renders, we want this also to happen over here, maybe sometime in the future. That's a side effect. OK. So let me give you some examples of these side effects. I got this API one, of course, right? When the component loads up, we make the API request, we return the DOM nodes, we kind of wait for that request to come back, and then when that happens, we set state, and that changes the state of the application, causing a re-render from that point down through the React tree. Right? That side effect, we don't know how long that request is going to take, right? And sometimes we also have, if it takes a long time, we do not want our user interface to become unresponsive as a result of that. So instead of making that API request in the component itself before we return React elements, we need to use an effect function to wrap up that behavior and store it for later. Because effects all get run after the DOM has run, after the DOM has been painted to the browser. So this is a new term we're going to talk about today. There's this concept of rendering and painting, these two stages when we're talking about React. When I mention rendering, I mean React is returning elements, because that word is pretty common in React, especially because of the class-based components. The only required function was render, and what it would do is return React elements. So we kind of got used to components render React elements as a way to talk about these things. But there's also this idea of painting, because what React does is it takes all of this element tree that it creates. It's just a bunch of objects linked together in a tree that can be converted to iOS views. It can be converted to the DOM, whatever. It takes that thing, and then it passes it off to, it makes its changes to the browser, so that the render is complete. Now the browser takes all of the communication or the messages from React that says, you need to update this text over here, you need to change the style over here, that's how we're going to change based on this. At that point, oh no, I lost my train of thought. It happens sometimes when I get excited. So, oh fuck, what was the last thing I said? Sorry? Yeah, render painting, that's right. Okay, so we send this to the browser. We send this to the browser. After the browser is rendered, everything's rendered, then the browser paints the stuff onto the actual screen. So the layout, the CSS, those DOM elements, the browser actually has to paint. We're going to say paint instead of render, because it also does this kind. It also does render it in its own way, but we'll call it paint because that's what the React documentation calls it. After the painting is complete, that means that all of the changes have been applied to the DOM in the browser. Then it will run our effect. So that means we've run the component, we've returned the DOM nodes, we've rendered all that, we've painted it all, and now we have this little effect over here. It's going to go off, make its request for data. The UI just sits there doing nothing. Request comes back, state is changed. We change the state. We change the state at the top so it propagates through the rest of the components, and we see all that data show up in our UI. But it's that side effect that triggers that API request, and that cannot happen within the component. It has to happen after the component is done rendering. Sure.
Kind of like conceptualizing. Is it like similar to like how we have like the stack where we do like JavaScript?
You know what's funny is that use state is a lot more like that than use effect is. Use effect is more about synchronizing our props and our state within components to things that are outside of React. Let's say that I wanted to, when you open the browser, you type in your name into that form in the interviewer, right? And then you close your browser and you come back and it's like, oh, well, you were never here. I don't know, but you had made some progress, right? Well, what if we stored the name that was typed in at that point in the local storage, so that when they load the page back up, it checks to see if local storage has a name already, and if it does, then it applies it to the form. That all has to happen. That thing that's happening outside of React is the local storage API of the browser. For us to get items and set items from that, those are side effects. Those should be treated as, let's say, side effects, right? So we might synchronize this piece of state and say every time this piece of state changes, which is the name that I'm typing into this input field, I also want to run this effect that will take the current value and set it to the local storage. And then when I load up this component, I'm going to check the local storage to see if there's a value, and I'll use that as my default for my state. So that side effect, though, has to be handled in a special way in React, because that's not something that we're doing within React. It's something that we're doing outside of React and bringing back in. Yes? That's right. That's a side. That is the example of the side effect that we're going to focus on today, because for the application, the interviewer schedule, we need to be able to load the data from the API server and then replace your fake data with that and have it render the schedule that way. So definitely, that is the main side effect for today. But we also has anyone put console log in the body of their function component? Yeah, right. What if I told you that is a side effect? It is, right? That's not returning React elements. That's a side effect. You get away with it because it is synchronous and it is fast. That's why it's OK. But if we were to do it properly, can I just, I think I could just put my components right in here. I don't even need to make files for them, do I? Right? Like, hold on. Maybe you didn't realize what I just did, because I was going to create a bunch of files for these components. But I could just create them here and not import them, right? So that's what I'm going to do, I think, for this. I'll see if that works. So this is going to be console log. And it takes in props. And this is the example component we're going to use. And it doesn't really do much, except the side effect is that it will log to the console when it runs. Every time it runs, it'll log to the console. OK? And maybe what it'll log is props.message. And maybe then here it says props.message. So I want to use this props.message. I'm going to console log it to make sure it's what I expect it to be. And then down here, I'm going to call this console log. And in here, I will return the console log. Actually, for something like this, where I have a message, and it's the only thing the component really needs, I kind of want to change this to be a child. Does that make sense? Console log hello, like that, maybe? I don't know. This is not really a great use case, but it does kind of show here. I'm going to take that hello text as a child. It is automatically given to me as a prop, because that's how React handles it. I can console log it out here, and then I expect it to also render it, return the React element that has it as its text, and render that, and then paint that to the screen. So I do. No, what did I do? OK. 60. Oh, well, it told me it is running on 6006. I have no idea why it chose that one. But here we are, and I'm going to load up the console. And we're going to see, sure enough, forget the warning for now, or forever. Hello is console logged. That works, right? But that happened before we returned the React elements, and the side effect should actually occur afterwards. So I want to change this, and I want to make this actually handled as a side effect. So separate it from the responsibility of rendering the component. And for that, I'm going to import useEffect as my the second hook that I now know about from React. And I could do React.useEffect if I want. I've seen people do that. But my preference is to import this named useEffect or useState or anything like that. I prefer to import that specifically. And then I will use it in my function here like so. OK? The parameter, this takes in 2 arguments. Right now, we're only going to worry about the first one, which is a function. So that's what our useEffect should look like when we start it off. Just an empty function that'll get run after the paint has happened. And actually, you know what? I could probably bring up. No, I'll bring that up later when I talk about cleanup and stuff, because it's a bit more relevant to that. So here, useEffect. Instead of doing this while I'm rendering, I'm going to move this into where it belongs, which is its side effect place here. And so now, oops, we get the same result, kind of. I think. I don't know if it's exactly the same. But hello is now being called after that paint occurs. And so we're handling this side effect correctly. I'm not recommending when you console log that you necessarily need to do this. I just want to show you the most basic side effect that I can think of, and that is this one, right? Okay. Any questions about that, right? I've just moved it. React takes it, puts it off to the side, renders, paints, browser paints. React says, OK, well, now I'm ready to run my side effects. It runs any of the side effects that were created for it during that render, and then just sits there waiting for more state changes. Cool? So this is a package of behavior that we want to put off until after the rendering is complete. That's what this function holds for us. All right, so that's console log. That's one of the next side effect I'll talk about is updating the body background. So let's say that I have my DOM or my React app, and I embed it into div ID root. So now I have body, div ID root, and then my root element of my React app. But what if I want to? So I can manage all of the CSS from React root all the way down the tree. I can manage all the CSS in there, right? We can use class names to apply classes conditionally. We can actually use a style attribute, which I don't know. It's a technique people use. I like this. I like this way we're doing the styles, but lots of ways to do it. I guess the point is that we can't necessarily change the body color of the background of the body of the document dynamically because we don't have access to its class name property, right? Does that make sense? That maybe a side effect is also changing something outside of React's scope, like the background color of the body would be an example. Okay. So here, what I want to see is, let's see. Yeah. I actually don't know if this will work in here. Let's just double check to see if, it definitely has a body. So what I'm going to do is try and here, this body element that is higher up from it, I'm going to try and change its style. Let's see, what should I do with this? Button, on click. OK, so here's an interesting thing. Mm-hmm.
Are we talking about like just from the scope of that specific function doesn't have access to it because like scoping, or do you mean just like in general we don't have access to the body?
Right. So here is where my React app is rendered, right? And so if I want, so I could actually change any of the attributes of this tag here, but anything that's above it, I can't modify this.
Okay, we're only specifically talking about that one function. Like any function lower in the tree, we don't have access to like the parent classes for like styling. But we have access, like if we were to make a function within like the body, we'd have access to the class.
If you have function body, so normally the thing is, normally the body is higher than the React app. Like the body holds the React app, and React can only control the stuff that starts here.
I didn't know that.
This is what React has control over from its state and props and rendering point of view. But what we don't have the ability to do, I mean, we can say document.body.className equals and assign it, but that's a side effect, right? Because it's yes.
So is React essentially like it's unidirectional, so it's only going from the root and goes down?
For sure. Yeah.
So it can't like affect things that are above it, like in terms of like base, like.
Without it being a side effect, right? Without it being the result of a component rendering, because we can't change the body background color by rendering a component because it's not
The root, and the root is
exactly.
Unidirectional, so when you re-render something, it's from the root down.
Yeah, yeah, and the reason I say document body is because the reason I say document body is because it is always going to be outside of the React app. And even if you were to say that the body is the root where you mount your React app, which we don't recommend doing, we recommend putting a div instead, even at that point, you don't really have access to that because you're not the one. The point where that gets rendered is actually like one right below it. Exactly, yeah. Oh, here. Oh, probably not. This looks like this is some Storybook special stuff. Yeah. Yeah, because and all of that comes right from here. You've got the head, right? You've got the body here. No problem. It's okay to know about it now. You don't need to know about it yesterday, right? This is configured by our tools. It's part of it's built in. But now is a good time.
But
sure.
Conceptually, I didn't even think about the fact that it's inside the body.
Cool. Okay. Well, this is I think a good time to find this out. Here's the body. Here is the root element. Now in my document, I don't have those divs, but Storybook is injecting that stuff. They're doing something. Yeah. Those two divs here are definitely Storybook stuff. So, and I think they're just trying to put some. Well, I can't even see where this is actually. Oh, I see. No preview. Sorry, but neither no story. So these are like error messages for if I haven't loaded any stories or something like that they've injected in here. Yeah. Cool. Okay. So. So this is another side effect because we need to do something that's not returning the results of a render. I always forget how to do this. It's class names on actually, you know what? I think where are we? Web Compass. Yeah. I think I'm just going to go look at today. There we go. Class name, there it is. Oh, this is your assignment for today, by the way. Here we go. So this is what I want to do. When this component renders, I want it to, after the fact, go up and tell the body to change its class name yeah, let's do that. I guess that means we need to add some CSS. Well, easiest place could be right here. Oh, that's going to be. I never do this, obviously, right? I never put my own styles in my own HTML files. But I'm going to put it here, because then I don't have to create the file, and that's always nicer. So let's do some red. Now, background color, what have I done here? I'm sorry? I love having more than one eye. 2 eyes, I mean. Okay, okay, good. So now I have this background color class, or this background class. And what I want to do is apply that here. Okay, what have I done here? Div button, yeah. I went halfway and then, okay. Oh, that's why. Please. Body class. What am I missing? Oh, okay, it's being applied. So I did. Well, Oh, this is also, so here's a slight problem in Storybook. I actually replaced it, right? Like I've replaced what they had, so I want to make sure I don't do that. So I think I'll get the value and attach it. Try that. Okay, that's a bit better there. But where's my back? Style. Thought I did. Where'd it go? Oh, wait, no, this is what's happening. Of course. This is my forget this completely. This is stupid. I am not running this app using this at all, right? I'm using Storybook right now. So this file is not loaded by Storybook. Storybook has its own version of this. This is what I would change for Webpack Dev Server. I apologize for that. This is definitely Webpack. This is how Webpack Dev Server serves that stuff. But I bet you that within Storybook, they have a file very similar that they use to also load and mount your stuff. So I got to come up with a different way to do that. Maybe I could just do this. And okay, and then better. Okay, so now we've synced up this component rendering, and actually, what's going to be kind of interesting here is that we've synced up this component as rendering with the changing of the background color It's kind of hard to see what that is, what that means, and how it works. But what if we instead took a look at something interesting here? Actually, wait, that's not going to do it. How do I want to do this? I want to make this here dependent on some state changing. Because when state changes, we can have our effects get run as well. It's not just when the component loads up. It's also whenever state or props change, we can also have this thing get run. So maybe instead of on load, the background gets changed, what I'll do is I'll keep a piece of state, and when I click the button, it'll change that state, causing the component to re-render. And if that piece of state is now changed, it will change the background color for me, right? So I can kind of try to, what I'm trying to do here is synchronize my background color change with my state change. When I change my state, I want it to change my background color. And use effect is very good for this type of a problem or technique we need to do. Let me actually, because I want to be able to give these back to you. So I'm just going to fix this up a second here. Okay, so now we'll do background. So here I'm going to add another story, and we'll call it background. And here we're going to call this one use effect, because that's the grouping of all of these stories. It's all about using effect. This one's console log. So my effect, or my story here, it tells the story of the background component. And my background component does not have a child. It's going to be a button that says change color. So when I go here now, I want this, when I click this, to actually change that color. So I'm going to say const color set color equals use state. And what is my default color? Maybe white background, right? Doesn't really matter. Green background. Yeah? Okay. As long as it's not red, right? We can go red and green, then red? Okay. So here's the color. We want to take that value here, and actually that's not going to, oh no, we want it to be, false. Show background. The other example would take a little bit more other stuff to set up. So this one's going to be a bit more along the lines of what I want to show you. So here, if show background, then I will set the background color. Right? If this state is true, then I will set the background color. Else, well, the storybook's definitely made it a little more complicated, because I could just make it empty otherwise, right? Do you know what I mean? I have to make it still be the storybook tag, but not have background on it. I have to remove that if I'm going to toggle back and forth between these things. So what I'll do here is I'll take this class names. What is class name? What do we think that looks like? Do you want to, I don't know, console logout and see what we're dealing with here? It's just a string, right? Oops, change color. Use state not defined. So it's complaining that use state is not defined. I have to import it at the top. Okay, cool. And now, here, this is what it's showing us, is the name there. I think I would set this to true and then check again. Okay, good. Oh, that's unfortunate. It has to be a space. Okay. So here is what I'm dealing with in terms of the class, right? This is a space-separated, it's a string with spaces that separate our classes. That's how I would describe this. Between every class is a space. So really what I need to do is just chop off the end, right? And then I can join it back together, or make an array out of it, chop off the end, join it back together. I get my two first styles rather than, yeah, okay. So let's take document.body.className, make it equal to, so grab class name dot split, right? On a space. When I find a space, I'll split. It's going to be an array now. My array of classes, right? My array of class names. So what I want to do now is it I never modify arrays like this. Slice, array slice. It's okay. You can watch me look stuff up. I do it all the time. That's the shallow. No, I don't want the shallow. I want. Is it splice? I always confuse these two. Yes. The splice method changes the contents of an array by removing or replacing existing elements and/or adding new elements. The other thing that I could do, well, yeah, let's do slice. So here, I just want to take splice. That inserts, replaces. I want to remove. What? How, is it unshift or shift? This is so sad. I think it's shift, right? Yeah. Yeah, so shift, I think, was the best one there for that then. No, okay. It's pop. Returns that element. That's not what we want, though. We can't use pop because it returns that element, and we need to have the array back. So I think it's unshift, isn't it? No, yeah, I think I just have to chop it off, right? So, well, let's not try and be too fancy. Let then. Yeah, but I need you to join it again after, right? So I guess I'd have to then do, I could do the join on the same array, so that's why I'm switching to let, yeah.
And you know it's background, yeah. So you could just slice like that amount of index letters off of the end.
I know,
so
I know.
Dirty. It's so dirty.
That's what that's what I'm doing here, right? So this is actually,
You know what I mean?
look at this. So I can do that with destructuring, right? I can take the first and the second values from here, and then I can just do something stupid like this. I don't even need to. I mean, it doesn't really matter. This is kind of joke code anyways, right? I'm just trying to get to the point where I can actually set this up. So now when it says show background true, we'll do it. Otherwise, we won't. I think this works. Yep. And now what we need to do is make it so that when I click this button, it will modify this state. So this is something we need to, this is actually from yesterday. I'm going to show you something from yesterday that will hopefully help with yesterday's material. On click equals, what do I pass to this function? What do I want it to call? Set state, yeah, but specifically. Set show background, right? Okay, with what parameters? True. Okay, so set. That doesn't work, right? I want everyone to know that this does not work. We need to know about this. We need to be aware of this being a major, not necessarily problem, because once we learn, it actually is no longer a problem. We just understand it. So what is wrong with this code right now? It's going to run immediately when this function renders. That is not what we want, because what that happens if we do that is our onClick event is receiving undefined. That's what happens, right? This function returns undefined. OK, well, onClick, you get undefined. That's pretty useless, right? So what we need to do here is we can't invoke this function as we render the component. We have to wrap it up in its own function. So this function now is the reference that we passed to onClick. And when we click it, it calls set show background true. That's what it knows to do. And even if we have an ID and we put it in there, it would call it with the right ID or the right person's name. This is a very important thing to realize, that when we're doing this type of thing with use state, for example, we often have to do this, where we have to wrap that call up so we pass the right parameters or arguments to it. Oops. OK. So now, when I click this, and I'm actually going to say, yeah, I'll leave that for now, because otherwise I'm going to make it a bit more confusing. I don't want to do that. Now, I don't really want to swap it back. Well, maybe I can do. So now I've created 2 buttons. What's going to be my problem? Sorry, fragments is the solution. The problem is adjacent elements, trying to return 2 elements from the same function. So I'm going to put fragment in there. I'm going to have to import that from here. And I'm just going to move on from that after updating that, right? So instead of doing like a back and forth, I'm going to just say change color, change color. So what's happening now is when I call set show background, it triggers the change to the state that's stored over here somewhere by React. And then React knows it also needs to render this component as a result of that state update. And so it re-renders the background component. Now show background gets assigned a new value, right? It's that true value now. And so as we go through here, we create this effect. Now it only runs the useEffect function. It does not run the function inside. But it also makes available show background inside here, right? Right? Is that fair? That this is how we. So does anyone know the term we use that allows us to access this variable here that's not in this scope, the one that's outside of the scope? What's the term used for when a function has access to the variables outside of its lifting up? I think, is that relevant to state maybe? No, I'm not sure. Yeah. Again? Yeah, that's right. So closure is the way that it's because of closure that we have access to show background variable here. Okay? So this is actually so closure is very useful for this function. This is why this is possible with this style, is because of closure. And I just want people to recognize that we are now using closure, and often we use it and don't really realize it, right? Like how often do we just put a function in there and then accept all those variables are free and easy to use for us, right? This is closure, and this is an example of closure. Okay, cool. So this useEffect call will get run when the component is loaded the first time. That's the first time it will get called. And then it will get called when I change the state. Does that sound good? So every time, so when I click on set show background, it refreshes. If I don't want this effect to run unless show background changes. Does that make sense? Is there a point in having this effect run if the show background value has not changed whatsoever? There's no reason to have it run again, right? We only need to run this effect when the show background variable changes, because it is dependent on it. It cares about the value of show background in order to figure out how to actually handle the effect. So we have this dependency on our state here, and we can also have this dependency on props. So we only run effects when certain props are changed. Does that sound good as well? This is something, we have to learn this because we can use this technique of dependency management to avoid infinite loops in our rendering. So you might run into some of that as you start using useEffect. You might run into some infinite render loops. And what's happening there is useEffect is causing a state change that causes the component to run, that causes the useEffect to cause a state change that causes the component. This is the infinite looping pattern that we can run into with this technique. What we can do here with our second parameter, our second argument to this function, is actually give it an array that is a list of dependencies that it cares about. So if I say, only run this effect when this variable has changed, I've just accomplished that goal of not all state changes will cause this effect to run. So let me show you what that looks like. Right? I'll quickly. This is a bad name. I mean, I'm sorry, but the whole point is just I want something that changes state, but that is not that this effect is not dependent on that you can see that happening. So I'm going to let's do set fake change background, okay, and that's just going to be so we can see that it's actually changing the state. Fake change background. Okay. Oh, and the initial value for that is going to be hello. All right. And now when we click this, we're going to say goodbye, I guess. Just something to change it, right? So here, when I change the color, no problem. I can change it back and forth. When I change the color here, well, let's actually put a console log in there. Because this is otherwise it's hard for me to show you that it's not actually running. So when I call change color, actually, we start up first off. Component renders the first time, so that's where we get this because that is a dependency, so this effect will run, and on initialization, all those dependencies it'll run based on they have changed, they're brand new, right? So now I click change color, and it calls ran effect because, yeah, it was dependent on that change, and so it listened for it, and it ran the effect after the paint occurred. I call this, and sure enough, same deal. It was dependent on that show background. It changed back to the other state. But now I can click this button as many times as I want, and it doesn't actually run the effect, and that's because this effect is only limited to changes based on its dependency list. Now this is an array, so it actually could have 1, 2, 3, 4 different values in there. Yeah, question? Okay. Because it's not true. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, because I'm not actually. So this is the nice thing is that when I give it that, it doesn't just say, oh, what is this value? It's like, is it the same as it was before? It's. So if I click the first one, it's no problem. If I click back and forth, it's no problem. But when I click it again, that effect should not run again because it is not. Nothing has changed. Great pointing that out. This is great because that's actually a very important part of the use effect. Like that's actually one of it is actually quite complicated. It looks like, oh, it's just this function we've had, but there's so much to it. It's very, very powerful, and a lot of React developers are very, very excited about using this to manage their side effects in a different way than we've been used to. Do we have any questions? Because this is a great time to take a break before we move on to attaching event listeners, and then I'd like to do an API request in front of you as well. Yes.
So any variable inside use effect, if it's changed, will activate use effect.
Yes. Well, it has to be in the dependency tree.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, use effect will get run. So if there is no not tree, dependency array. If there is no dependency, so here's how this works. If there's no dependency array, run it every single time. If there's an empty dependency array, only the first time. So this will only run. And I was going to get to that with the next exercise, but it may as well right now. So it runs ran effect there, but look, now not again. Because that dependency has been removed, they're saying we don't depend on anything. So no changes to state, no changes to prop could cause this effect to run again. But here, look at this. What is that? What does this mean down here? What do we think this means? Warning about what? Who do you think's warning me? Sorry? I may not want lint. Lint is warning me. So actually, React has lint rules that they've included to try and make it easier for us to use effect, because there are weird things like this. Here it's saying React hook use effect has a missing dependency. show background, either include it or remove the dependency. So I have two options. Either I get rid of this variable from here because it knows it's in there and I'm not actually depending on it, or what we really need to do is add it, background, and now it's no longer warning me because all of my dependencies have been satisfied. If I add another one in here, well, it's warning me fake change background's not in there. So I need to also make that a dependency, because when fake change background I want this to run as well. Obviously not practically, but as far as the example goes, this is the interface to use effect. It's a function that gets run after the paint occurs, and a list of dependencies for variables that it cares about, and only needs to be run when those change, not just like when they actually change. Cool? Okay. Questions before we break? Awesome. Thanks, everyone. We'll just come back after. Anyone want to see that? Sorry if anyone. I had some questions during this. So this is where this comes from. I just want to fill everyone in where this is now, because we did talk about it a little bit during the break. Let's make sure this is on. It's on, and that needs to be set to split screen new. Where is it? There we go. Okay. I've got this effect doing a bunch of crazy stuff now. So my background effect is actually using the set show background function here, which is going to change the state for me. This is I didn't really want to show this because again it's just not necessary right now, but it is useful. It is a second way that we can use our useState functions. The ones that come from useState, they have a second way of using them, and that is through an argument that is of type function. So here we can see I'm actually passing a function to set show background now rather than just the value true or false. Is that clear to people what the syntax is? Okay. So the reason I want to do this is because I want to, when it's true, set it to false, and when it's false, set it to true. This is a toggle now. I'm toggling the background. The reason I have this here is because when I call it as a function like this, React knows what the last value is and will give me the last value so I can use it to calculate the new value. And if I don't do it that way, there are bugs that can arise from that due to a long time and stale state and all of this. So we do get into this with the activities. There is a couple places where you have to kind of do this to change some existing state. Don't get too hung up on it right now, but it is just a second way to use this exact same function. Yeah. No, you call it whatever you want. It's a parameter. Some people call it previous state. Call it whatever you want. Prev, up to you. It's just you just pass it a function with any argument you want, and it holds the previous value. So in this case, if I change it from hello to goodbye, previous would be hello. I could say, okay, well, whatever, reverse it or something like that, right? Because then I could get the existing value and do something with it. Whereas this will be false. It gives me false. I put an exclamation in front of it. It becomes true. I return that. Whatever I return from that function becomes the new state. That's what's happening here. Whatever I return becomes a new state. So when it's true, it becomes false, etc. Okay. So the reason I did this is because I wanted to put a state change into my effect, because that happens. It is often that an effect will cause a state change somewhere down the line. In this case, it's happening very quickly. I'm not going to show that for very long because it's not easy to look at, right? Set show background, what's happening here is it's rendering the first time. When it renders the first time, show background is false. So it applies that style. So it is white, right? And then it calls set show background, which changes the state. Well, actually, hold on. Sorry, this is what happens. I want to be more specific. I want to have more detail in that because I feel like I missed an important step there. This component renders the first time. It sets up its initial state. Okay? It creates and saves an effect. So creates and saves an effect. That's what's happening right now. It returns the current React elements that it wants to. Okay. The browser paints these React elements, and then our effects get run. Now, it calls this, and it says, oh, show background was false, so I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to make it, well, actually, this probably breaks it because of how that works. Let's probably try that way. We'll do the opposite. So now it's true. So the first time it's true, we show the background red. We add the background tag to it, and then we set show background, which is a change of state. That causes this component to re-render. This component grabs the latest version of this value, which is now false, grabs the latest version of this value, which is unchanged. It creates the effect. It returns the DOM elements, or the React elements, and then it runs the effect after the paint, causing the background to change again, causing another state change to occur, causing the loop to occur. That's the loop. That is, every state change is causing the effect to render, causing another state change, causing the effect to render.
So any like because set like when you do those set events, it's gonna be rendered. So if you have two of those,
Yep.
do they like raise conditions in a certain way?
They'll render in that. They will render in that order.
They always like.
But that's why we have that previous function thing. We can be guaranteed that they will render in that order, and then when we call that state, we'll get the previous one from that order. So it's right. You're right to be slightly concerned about that, but you don't really need to think about it. Yeah. The reason we don't need to think about it is because we really manage our dependencies using that array, and so our effects are really tied to certain changes, rather than just saying you change to be tied to any change, right? So we. Sorry. Oh, sorry. So this one here, right? This dependency array that we have, what's going to happen if I make that change? Run once, right? I do not depend on any changes to any variables, so you're going to run once. That's what this is doing right now. Even though this got called and the state got changed, this did not get rerun. Does that make sense? Somewhat? Okay. So what we need to do is actually add all of our dependencies. And again, lint is going to help us with this. I have this embedded in my tool, though, and I'm not sure, you know what, to be honest, I'm not sure how to set that up for everyone, because because this is actually a host machine consideration. My linter running in my IDE is about my host machine and making sure that I have NPM on my host machine hooked up through my editor and stuff. So we could, if you want to get that going, I think it's probably a good deal to do, but might have to be doing it at an individual level. I think there's a ESLint. Yeah, here. This extension should be installed. And now that we have Node installed, we should be able to install ESLint as a global package, and then that should be able to run this. So I can't spend the time getting lint configuration working, but just as we're going through this stuff, if it's not working for you, then let me know, and I'm going to learn how to write an activity or make something that's going to help people get that set up. I just don't know how to do it with all the possible configurations that we have right now. So that out of the way. I want to see here. Let's see. No, it doesn't show me there. That's unfortunate. OK, so I don't want it to only be. I don't want to only run this whenever only the first time. So I got to put my show background in there. Now back to that, and yeah, I think that's all right for now. So how do we feel about this hook right now? Kind of seen, how this component using the useEffect hook, kind of seen what side effects are? Do we understand that a bit more? What is a side effect? If I were to ask what the single responsibility of a component is, or what the main responsibility of a component is? What is that? Returning React elements. So everything else is a side effect, right? OK. I've got 45 minutes, and I've got a few examples here. The next one I wanted to do. Oh, that's good. It's not gin or it's not whiskey. It's not whiskey. It's cold tea. It's really nice though. I make it at night and then I let it cool all night and then. Oh, it's so good. Okay. Yeah. All right. The next one, I need the gin for the cleanup method. So there's sort of the last really the last really important thing I need to show you is cleanup. And this is, right now so far we haven't needed to clean up any of our effects. But sometimes we do cause side effects that we need to clean up when the component goes away. So here are some examples of those side effects that we create that likely have to be cleaned up. The first one I can think of here is I'm going to attach an event listener to the window object. So React, I can attach event listeners to anything controlled by React, right? I can on-click event listener. I could do on-change. I could put on any of my React nodes. I can just put the event on there, no problem. But if I want to put an event on the window object, so that if I resize the window or I click any key, in that case, I have to use an effect for that because adding an event listener is a side effect of rendering a component. So I'm not sure, I haven't tried this in Storybook, but let's see if it works. And I'm going to return, let's just say div, or this will be an unordered list because it's actually going to be a few different key presses that we're going to pay attention to that we care about. And I haven't done this live, so I might make a few mistakes, but let's see. ASDW or SDE, like how do people game these days? Is it, sorry? ASD, okay, so we're going to listen for ASD and W. So something like this, where each of our keys will have a different status. So this is going to be what I show in here. When A is pressed, it'll say true. When it's released, when it's released, it'll go back to false. And so each of these will have their own little status state. That means here I need to A set A. Oh, it's gross. Okay, well, whatever. We'll just say it's not hit by true, or by default, it's not. It's not pressed. Oops, AS. Oh. Okay. Oops. Come on. It's painful, I know. Oh, and there's an A. Okay. Okay, so is that kind of right? ASDW, ASDW, ASDW. Yeah, okay. Oh, and this should be status, right? Thank you. Okay. Well, at least this should render now, right? Oh, get that out of the way. Okay. Here's something. React does not render the word false. It does not render the word true. So I have to actually render something if it's true and something if it's false. So let's just false, up. No, wait, that's, yeah, down and up. So when status is true, I want it to say down, and when it's false, I want it to say up. So I think I just do that here. Okay, that's better. So now when I click the A button, oh, that actually might not work. Well, actually, I think you know what? They probably just attach an event listener, right? So why don't I just attach another event listener and see what happens? I don't know. Okay. This is where we have to now set up the side effect. Now, if I attach an event listener when I load the component, I want to remove the event listener when the component goes away. This is the sort of the life cycle of a component. It is mounted. It updates a whole bunch of times or none, and then it is unmounted from the document. Cool? That's like, those are the different phases of a component. So when a component is mounted, we want to attach our event listener. And when the component goes away, we want to get rid of that event listener so there's no memory leaks. We don't want our event listeners to point to functions in here that don't exist anymore. That would be unfortunate. So what we do is we use effect, and we set this up to on, let's say, we want to window.add event listener key down. Oh, this is going to be tougher than I thought, unfortunately. Okay. So, yeah, let's do it this way. So this is much easier as a custom hook. because what I do is I make each of these here becomes like a use key down hook instead. And so all of the state, or the state and the effect are kind of held together, or like kind of encapsulated together and then passed around as a function. Right now I kind of have to, actually, yeah, no, this I think this will work just fine. I can just do it once. I'm not I haven't done this though. So my function here takes an event. I'm just going to console log here. What is it? How do I get the key? Key code, maybe? Yeah, so I'm getting the key code now. Cool. Oh, that's not going to be fun at all. I'm gaming. This is me gaming. Okay, well, at least A is 65, so let's do that. What I want to do here is if event.keyCode is 65, that's my A, right? Then I will set A, and I guess I want to be, I just want to set it to true here, right? Like I'm not toggling anything here, because I also need to handle this here where I set it back to false on the down, right? Something like that? Thank you. Yes, exactly. Key up. So key up. Okay. Let's see. Okay. So I am now. I'm gaming. Yeah, gaming. Okay. So let's quickly add a few more of these. Oops. A S. Oh, what's S? Did I get rid of my console log? I did, didn't I? Okay. Oh, so key is, yeah, I always forget the details of this. If I put key, can I just put S? Okay, and I'll try that with A as well. I would much rather do that. I know there's one of them that does it. Yeah, and S. Oh, S, set S to true. S. That's so gross. Oh, it's not coming up. So anyways, there we go. Yeah. Yeah. Sweet. So let's take, I'll just finish these ones off and then I'll switch them all to false instead of doing it the other way. So I'll do this. And you are ASD, and you are W, and then that means up here as well. All right. Okay, cool. And then we just have to switch take those over here. And maybe I'll just make this a custom hook tomorrow. I was kind of thinking what my examples would be, but this one is actually a really good example for just cleanliness. You're gonna, yeah, you'll see. All right. Looks like all of them are working now. Cool. Okay. So now that we have this set up. Okay. Now that we have this set up. Here is what's happening. Every single time anything changes, it is calling use effect, which means every single time that anything changes, I'm adding a new event listener. How many event listeners do you think I've added?
So many.
So many, right? Every single time I change the state, it added a new event listener. So we can't just, we can't just create these event listeners. We also have to have a way to remove them. And this is the third most important, or well, I'm not saying it's the third most important part, is the third major part of use effect that we have to understand in terms of the API. So we know it takes a function. We know it takes an array of dependencies. The function that it takes here, so this one right here, this function, if it returns a function, it will be called on cleanup. The function that gets returned from this use effect function is called by React before the next effect is run. That works for us, right? We add the event listener. We listen for the event. The event causes us to change that. Okay, well, we can remove the event listener, add the next one again. This is how it works. It seems a little bit weird. It seems like kind of unnecessary to keep adding that event listener, but that's also preventable. We don't want to add an event listener and remove an event listener every time we change the state. Actually, wait. Yeah, I think that's, yeah. So this effect is only for setup. It does not get rerun again. It doesn't need to. All it does is create event listeners, right? All of the logic for setting stuff, well, that just happens to be, all of the stuff that we render actually just happens to be returned by the function in the rendering phase. The use effect does not care about stuff after the effects have been added, right? So that means that in this case here, we actually don't want it to run again. We want it to run the first time. No dependencies means do not run again. But if we get rid of this component, those event listeners still exist. So we've created 2 event listeners. We've typed a bunch of stuff. We still only have 2 event listeners. We load another component instead. We still have 2 event listeners, pointing to a function that doesn't exist now. So here, I return the function that knows how to clean up those event listeners from this effect. I think it's just now, the way that I'm going to test this, actually, that's not going to. Well, yeah, I guess technically this should work. If I select the component in Storybook and I press a character and it adds the event, I think if I click on another character and another thing in Storybook, it should remove my component. I'll see if that works. We'll see. Just give me a moment. And so let's put one here as well. This is going to be, when we load up, it's run, and the event handlers are added. When I press A, oh, yeah, I didn't have it selected, unfortunately. I didn't have that window selected. So now when I press A, we're seeing that test is output, right? So that event listener is still firing, which makes sense. But what happens if I go over here? Oh, OK, well, at least it's working. Oh, I didn't pass it the second function. That's what I need to do. I forgot about that. So this needs to be I'm just going to move this into a function here. Call key down. So key down is now that thing. I may as well, because I can't remove all of the event listeners. I have to remove the one with this function reference in it. That's what's happening here, right? Is that when I, or that's remove. Yeah, and I want to add the event listener. That's fine. I want to remove the key down one. Yeah. So I can't just pass it that, hey, remove event listener key down. How many of there could be a bunch from Storybook. Don't want to get rid of those. So instead, we have this function that has a very specific location in memory. So that location in memory, I'm basically passing it that information as well. So it says, remove the handler that has this, that matches this. And if it goes through its list of handlers, it compares them to this function, finds the one that matches, and removes only that one from the list. Does that kind of make sense? Because we can attach more than one event listener to, of that type to the same thing. We can say window.addEventListener key up 3-4 times and have each of those things do something different. We don't have to have it all happen in one event listener, but as a result, we also then need to be able to individually remove those things. This is how we do that, I think. So I'm just going to move this. This is actually a little nicer anyways. Up. All right, let's see if that's a bit better. Now, we'll go here to cleanup thing. OK. I don't know where this looks to me. This is not me. So I'm gonna leave that storybook. I'm gonna leave that out of there. I don't want that. So here, adding, that is happening, right? When I click over here, oops. I click over here, all my stuff, that's working. It's not adding anymore, so it's not rerunning the effect every time, right? Now, when I go back here, oh, come on. Oh. Thank you. Okay, that has to fix it now. Sidebar, clean up, do that again. Okay, adding, test, sidebar, background, removing. Okay, ASDW, nothing. Actually, that's kind of interesting because it seems like I may have removed it for. What's hidden over here? Look at this. Look at this up here. 98. Something's happening. I don't know what that is. It might just be my filtering here. I don't know. The important part, though, is that we have managed when that thing gets called. If I remove that here, and we try this again. As I type here, that works. When I hit the sidebar and I go here, and I try again, yeah, there. Right? These event listeners still exist, but that component is gone. Okay? Now here it's saying can't perform a React update on an unmounted component. I mean, that's fair. We shouldn't be able to do that. So this is why we have to clean up our effects. We have to know which effects need to be cleaned up, and we actually actively have to do it in a function returned by our useEffect function. Yes? For sure. Yep. Because, well, it'll run that function. Yes, for sure, in that case. So it knows all of those phases of its life. It knows when it's going to take it out of the DOM, right? Because it has this tree that represents what the DOM is. And when it compares it to the last tree, it'll say, oh, this element's not here anymore. That means we're removing it. So we need to do the unmount phase of that component. Yeah. Whereas a lot of updates are change inner text, change the class name, change the style. They're just modifying elements. Whereas when the unmount occurs, they're actually removing elements from that full element from there. Okay. All right, so let's put this back in, and then we're happy because try that again. Removing. Yep. Okay. Yes. Question.
You also end up removing the functionality from Storybook by removing. Is it because they're using the same event?
I don't know the answer to that. I would have to look into that. I don't want to spend the time on it right now because it's not actually really important for the useEffect part of this. That's more of a remove and add event listener consideration, right?
My question is coming from so if that's the case, then
no,
you have many events.
You should be able to remove them one at a time. I'm not sure why it's happening this way.
Unless you're using the same, right?
But they don't have access to my function. It's like this is the function. I will look into it, but I don't know why it's also removing the effects of the storybook stuff. I'd have to look into the detail on that because I don't know what their code is doing. I think I thought that this was the case. I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure why that's happening. Do not worry about that too much, please, because it's the useEffect and the cleanup that we really care about. Whether or not you're probably not going to be doing this event listener thing this week at all. Probably not for your final project. WebSockets though, you will be doing. Maybe WebSockets. So when we load the component, connect to the WebSocket server. When we remove the component, what do? You disconnect from the WebSocket server. That's the responsible thing to do so that your connection isn't still there, so that you don't time out, so that you don't keep getting messages that call functions that don't do anything anymore. So we need to clean up some of these things. In this case, yeah. I will show you another example of this based on so I'm going to show you this example, and then we're going to do an API request. We'll set up the API server and do a request, or well, actually, we'll just use I think code sandbox for that, unfortunately. What I wanted to show you was, oh yeah. Okay, so here, I think it's near the end with this thing here. We talk about this concept of debounce. Maybe it's in the next one. Yeah, cool. So the code for the jQuery and React versions, I'm going to go to the React version. This is the album search. And I've got this right here. Let's talk about this now, because we've just learned everything we need to in order to interpret this piece of code. How does the effect start? Yeah, in the effect, what happens first?
We set it off to the side to wait for the DOM to.
Oh, that's even more detailed than I was looking for. Perfect, right? The first thing that happens is it packages this behavior, and it puts it to the side to run it after the paint has occurred. So that's more specific than I was.
And then it sets a timeout.
Right. So it creates a timeout, which is a side effect, right? When we create a timeout in a React component, that is a side effect of rendering that React component. This is our debounce, which means as I'm typing into the input field, as long as I type in faster than 400 milliseconds per character, then it will continue to recreate this timeout every time. Okay? So as I type in, my component re-renders. It calls this use debounce hook, which basically I could just copy and paste this use effect into any code I want. I could just take this and put this into my own component. But here what happens is it creates that timeout. If there's a re-render that occurs based on one of its dependencies, is actually an array of dependencies that I passed in here, because I want the user of this hook to actually provide those dependencies. But just imagine this is an array of the things that this depends on, like maybe these things, right? So actually, I probably could have just put those in there. These are probably my dependencies. But what?
You set the use effect.
Yeah. When does this get run? Whenever these change, right? Yeah. We're not seeing what those are, but in the parent component, this is the search term. As I type in, the search term does not change. Or this, sorry, this is not the search term. This is the current state of the input field, right? Every time when I hit A, it re-renders the component. Or sorry, it sets the state, re-renders the component. I now have that new piece of state. It calls use effect. It creates the timeout. And the operation that's in here can be passed in something like set the term after this. So as I press A, that's not the search term yet. If I press B within 400 milliseconds, that's not the search term yet. If I press C again, that's not the search term. But when I stop pressing things, then this timeout finishes, and it calls my function that actually changes, or that does the request to search for data. So this is the reason I'm showing this to you. Is we don't have to understand this in detail, but I have to clean that up, because every time I press a character, it calls this, which creates a new timeout. But I need to clean up the old timeout first. I don't want to have a whole bunch of timeouts running. I just want it to be one timeout reset within 400 milliseconds every time I press a button. There is more detail on this specifically. We can see. Actually, I'll show you the. Here, I'll show you the source. There's a video that you'll watch that has this in it. So here, oh man, oh where's it? No. Okay. Use effect. Oh, there it is. Okay. So here's the use effect sequence, which you will have an image of this in your material. Run all the component functions to generate React element tree. Does that make sense? Okay. Store effect functions for after the paint. Does that make sense? Yeah? Apply changes to the DOM. Does that make sense? Yeah? Everyone? So far? Yeah? Okay, good. Now, number 2, the browser is taking this. So React does this stuff. And now the browser has been given the change, the DOM changes have been applied, like through the same things you would do, like document.body.className. That is a way that we change the DOM. So when that happens, the browser then paints the required elements based on the current DOM. And then React runs all the effects that were submitted during that render. So this is kind of the sequence. This is, oh, actually, I think yeah. Which one would it? I think something like this. Yeah. So here is sort of the flow of that. And again, this is definitely provided to you as a video, so it kind of builds this stuff up. But when we start off in this, we call our update state change function. This one's called set likes. You'll notice why in the example. It updates the state, causes the React to render, applies the element tree to the DOM. The paint actually happens down here at the browser level. And then the cleanup of the effects occurs, and then the new effects are run. If there is no cleanup function, no problem, it doesn't get run. But we have the ability to run a function before the next effect is run. And so here, when we look at this code, as long as before this next effect is run, it will have cleared the timeout for us, so we have the ability to create a new one. Yeah. That's
Theoretically, you could be just stacking all these things, and what's stopping you from having
so that video shows you the example of not cleaning up and what would occur, compared to then when we add the cleanup, how it actually behaves the way we want it to. So I hope that is actually helps you with this. But that's where I'm going to stop with this cleanup stuff right now, and I'm going to move on to API requests, just so we can get some view of that before we move on. Okay, or before we go and start working on the material. Now,
I mean, like it's not critical that you clean specifically that one up, because it would just be.
yes, it is critical, because what will happen, and you're going to notice this in the activity today, is that as I'm pressing the button, if it doesn't debounce, I'm going to start to see all of those effects resolve, like all of those set timeouts all get triggered 3, 4 at a time, constantly changing the state. You'll see like flashes and stuff like that, right? But if we start a timeout, and before that timeout is done, we kill the timeout and start a new timeout, then there's only possibly one set state that's going to happen at the end of that, right? And so the debounce is the process of continuing to delay that thing until later.
So like the triggers would happen if like you were pressing a bunch and then you stopped and you waited for all of them to end, and then you would press once and then you get all of the fire.
Yeah, something like that. Weird stuff like that. You're gonna in the video, I try and illustrate exactly what that looks like and the difference between the two, illustrating why cleanup is so important. So what are we doing here? We've got. I think what I was going to do is actually, let's see. Yeah, I don't often do this, but I feel like we're in a special situation. I'm going to do one of the activities from today. Is everyone okay with that? It's not an interview scheduler activity. It is the introduction to making Axios requests activity. So we use the album search instead. So I actually don't really. It's just I just wanted to pull away, do it there, and then you move into the interview scheduler and do the download of the data. So it's gonna be very familiar. You're gonna do this again later today, but I hope it helps you get through it a little bit faster, feel better about it, kind of thing. Is that all right? Okay. It also just gives me a real something simple that I can use here. So the first thing that I'm asked to do is I have a second branch here. So I have master. Now master is the finished product. If I go through here, I have all of the components set up with sort of all this logic here. So much stuff going on, including this one right here. This is what I want to do. I want to make an Axios request. And I want to make the Axios request to Apple, iTunes.apple. And I want to be able to use my search term to make that request. And then when the request is completed, I want to set the state to now update the results. Okay? So we're going to do all of this at the base level. We'll leave a lot of this stuff out because we don't need all of the details, but this is the master branch. When you start the activity, you're going to be asked to switch to the base branch. Now the base branch, again, is just set up as a starter project. And when we look at it, there's no effects here, right? Yes?
Can you give just a brief definition of Axios? Like, what is it?
Have you used Ajax before?
Yeah.
You don't have to install jQuery, and you can just install Axios instead. So Axios is an HTTP fetching library or HTTP request library or an abstraction over XHR request library or request, just like Ajax is. But we're not using Ajax, one, because it actually does have a bit of a different interface than we're liking these days. But Axios uses promises well. They're cancelable. They have all this kind of infrastructure built around it, right? Yeah. Talk about cleanup, right? Make a request, doesn't get done before the component goes away. You got to clean that shit up. That's right. So Axios can help with that. If we go, I'm definitely going to talk about Axios. Let's do that. Oh, Axios. I got to do Axios.js for that one, because otherwise I get, I don't know, some defense company or something, I'm sure. Here are the features of Axios. So that's what I said. At the top, that's your replacement of Ajax, right? Oh, it also works in Node. It's kind of cool. It supports the Promise API. Sweet, that's what we're using, right? We're not really doing callbacks anymore. Not necessarily, right? Not much. I mean, we are, but we use promises when we chain a bunch of asynchronous events. Intercept request and response. I guess that means that you can actually put in some like middleware almost. Maybe I haven't used that, but that's what that seems like to me. Now I'm making stuff up. Transform request and response data. Yeah, I mean, that seems like middleware to me. Cancels requests. That's cool, because that's not easy to do. Automatically transforms JSON data. I don't even have to think about it. I just give it objects, and I get back objects and arrays, and oh, that's nice, right? And client-side support, protecting for cross-site request forgeries. It's a security concern, but Axios says they help us with that. So hey, let's use Axios, right? The alternative. Let's talk about alternatives, though. Web browser fetch. Here is the official built-in request API for the browser. And you don't get all those things with it. So let's use Axios instead. Sound good? OK. If you want to use fetch later on, go for it. It's interesting. You can build stuff off of it. It is slightly different. I find Axios to just be more similar to what you're used to. And we definitely want to be using that just to try and learning a new request library is not necessarily going to be very valuable, but you don't really need to learn a lot about Axios. So I'm going to just show you some of the API, and we're going to be doing get, put, and delete requests using Axios. Okay. So Axios, we good with that now? Kind of know what it is? Okay. And how that is? All right. Let's do. So here's the code that we're going to start with. And this is going to be our live search. So I'm going to actually clone this. I guess I should just. And I would ask everyone to fork and clone it rather than clone it right from me. But actually, just never push up. Just never push back, and then I'm OK. I don't care if you just clone it then. But don't try and do a PR on my repo. It's no. Well, I mean, actually, if you want to improve something, definitely welcome for that. But not if it's just activity code, unfortunately. OK, get clone. So we'll do that. So now we have album search. And I'm going to go all the way into the React albums here. And I'm going to npm install that. Some mama's medicine. So good. Well, it's a leader. 1.14. No, 946 milliliters of straight homemade vodka.
That's almost 40. It's almost a 40.
Start this app up. Please help. Please, please, please. This would be really great if I find out that it doesn't work right. Oh, whoa. What the fuck?
There's no winning.
No, but this is great because I found out now. But sons of bitches. All right. Well, I'll have to make that update immediately after this. It's kind of frustrating because, well, I want to put that. I need my JS config. That's what I need. Need my JS config. There's my JS config. Let's see if that does a better job. Ooh. It's not the same error. It's still waiting. Right. But it is the same error. Nope. Yep, same error. What the fuck is your source? What version? Oh, what version are we on here? React. That's why. Okay. Do I put it in my? That's so frustrating. I think it was in my .env file. I think the setting for that to make that work in the older version of this was actually in a .env file that I never committed to version control. So not only am I going to fix that, I'm also going to have to send a message out, I think, that says that they need to. Although I think this happens later in the day, so I can't imagine many people are doing this yet. I'm just going to. I'm going to upgrade to the latest version of React scripts, which support my absolute path configuration here. Oh, that's JSON, remember? Oh, that was the other problem I did. Okay. So I'm upgrading my React scripts now, because version 3 and version 2, that's very different. I want us all to be on I want all of these apps to be on version 3, because otherwise it gets too hard to manage. So the reason this thing was created months ago, and so it kind of just got out of date, and no one has really looked at it until now. So what I want this to do is set up my source directory as the root of all of my code, so that when I go in here and I import things, those things are imported from the source directory, but I don't have to put // or some relative stuff. So again, it's that absolute pathing, and I want to see, hopefully that works. What is going on? Oh wait, did I not npm install? I didn't, right? I just removed node modules. Yeah, thank you. That's. Yeah. I love it when the errors make sense. Okay, so I'll upgrade this. I'll push that change. I don't imagine anyone will run into it yet, but it's good to know that. Whew. It's good to know that. So please. Oh, hold on. It takes a little while. Yeah, I've learned not to get dissuaded by that, but this is what we want to watch for, right? Oh, okay, better. Yay. Okay. So that'll be an easy change for me to make right after this. So here, it'll do the search no problem. I can do that filtering stuff. We're not going to get into those details. We're just going to worry about downloading data based on the search term. So what I need to do is git check. I want to check out base. Yeah. I think I've installed node modules already. It didn't replace those, so I think I can just npm start again. Let's see. All right, this is what we're going to start with. And this is what you would start with today. I just removed a lot of the complex stuff out of it so that we had a place to do an API request before we're asked to do it in the application that we're building. So here, as I type, nothing's really happening. And when I go into my inspector here, yeah, we just don't see any real stuff happening. So I'm going to set this up so that when I load the component, it's going to render it first, right? That's the first thing that happens. It's going to first render this and return those elements. But it will have created a side effect while it did that, right? So later on, that side effect will get run. And that side effect is going to make a request to this server. Now, I should probably just look up that API call. Let's see. Live search. All right. Now, I just want this part here. Now, this is a side effect. And when I say that this is a side effect, I need to type in use effect and give it a function. Now, when do we want this side effect to run? Yeah, when we change the form value, exactly. Is that the only time?
No, after a certain amount of time has passed.
Okay.
From keystroke.
Cool. So if I were to tell you that our debounce is managed by the search bar, that the search bar will only pass a term back to the parent when it has fully debounced it to the point. It would be actually when this value changes. Right? So we want to on initialization we want to do our first request. The value of term is empty string, so it's actually going to make a request for empty string in that case. We could avoid that. I'm not going to worry about that because then I'm adding more stuff and it just doesn't make no point. But here, when we load it up, this effect will get run, and it does care about this term, right? This term is all it cares about. When that term changes, the effect should be rerun. Make sense?
So when you're saying like the form is being handled by something else, we're just gonna look at the value.
That's right. Term will only change once you've typed in and stopped typing. The search bar component manages debouncing and calling a function back from the parent. So here, we give the search bar a function called onSearch. This is what the search bar calls when we want to actually execute the search. Not when someone has typed something in, but when they have stopped typing something in. Is that clear? Okay. So what we pass as the onSearch function is a function that takes in the term that we want to search for. This is what the search bar is providing back up here. And we call setTerm to now apply that to the state of the live search component. The live search component re-renders. The new value of term is then assigned to this value here. The use effect is run, which causes the Axios request to fire. The Axios request, it does an Axios.get request, for the term. Oh. For the term. Now, when the term changes, well, actually, in this component, when anything changes, right? When anything changes, this request will be made. So let's just kind of see what that looks like. Oh, use effect Axios. I just need to import these things, right? So, I mean, I don't always remember to import stuff before I use it. When you run into something like this, I'm not going to put import in the material. I'm not going to put everything you need to import because that's kind of, it gets ridiculous at some point, right? So here, when I run into problems like this is kind of what that means, right? Where does use effect come from? I know I didn't make it, so it means I probably didn't import it. Where did Axios come from? I didn't make it. I probably need to import it. I think Axios is already installed. It just needs to be imported into this file. And use effect as well. Now, here we are. Let's look at our console network here. Clear that out. I'm filtering only, oh wow, that's too far, too close. XHR. I'm filtering based on XHTTP requests, XML HTTP requests. So I should see my, my search in here. So, on load, this is the request that's made. And over here, term is empty string. So it gets no results back, right? That make sense? Okay. So that's run the first time. Now, what happens if instead I say Beyonce? Yep. So here, when I load, it does the search for Beyonce, and it gets these results back. So now I can have these results, and I can set them to some state within my application. I want all of this data to now be available in the application. That means this thing right here, this array of albums, needs to become my array of results. Okay? So I've made the request. I need to attach then to it, because it's a promise. It returns a promise. And this is, our side effect is going to take however long. So when it comes back, we get the response. Now, Axios has, and I can show this to you a little bit, but I mean, this is a situation where it really is important for people to kind of look at this documentation for Axios. Like, I could tell you about it, but I probably can't tell you everything about it. So we want to kind of look and see, like, how do we post stuff? It tells us right there, right? And this is body data being passed to the server. Okay. When we receive a response, so one way we can find out what this response comes from Axios. They decide what this response looks like. This response is an object that has a whole bunch of information on it. Response.status code, what do you think that has? 200, 404, yeah, well, exactly. Like, well, it's an HTTP status code, right? So the response.status code, response.data. This is response.data. Okay. I'm going to show, yeah, here. Oh no, that's configuration. Here, or no, that's the error handling. Let's say. I think that's the best approach. When the documentation isn't going to tell me exactly what's inside of this object, why don't I just take a look for myself, right?
Better zoom out.
Sorry?
Better zoom out.
Yeah, better zoom out. So here is the. Here it is. So this is my object. This is what Axios is now giving me. It's resolving to this object, providing this data back to me when it's complete. And I have things that I don't really want to even look into, like config. I'm not going to be worried about that right now. This, though, that matters to me, right? Because this is where I'm going to find my collections, all my music. So I care about response.data. And response.data.results is actually the value I want to use. There's some other stuff here, the headers, status stuff. I'm not going to use that right now. But here, console.log, response.data.results. I console log it now to confirm that it's exactly what I thought it would be. It is. And so now, what I want to do, how do I take this data and change my state? Set results, exactly. Now, what's happening? Not stopping, right? Why is it not stopping? Yeah, which state am I changing? Results, right? Now, I'm setting the results over and over and over, but the search term is staying exactly the same. But I only want to run actually want to run the request when the term changes. So this is where we really have to be using our dependency array, right? This would make it happen only once, right? Because why does that make it only happen once? Not listening to any dependencies, doesn't care about them. Now, what if we put in results here? Broken, right? Okay, well, we don't want, that's not what we wanted. But I just want to show you that loop. Because that's going to happen to most of you, I'm sure, right? But if I show you, at least you feel like, hey, someone else has had this happen too. Okay. What do I really depend on for this one effect? Right. So now, when I, oops. Let's do Drake. Now when I finish typing in, actually I think, right? So not making any requests right now, but then eventually it does when I stop. Now, when I type in, it'll make those requests for me as I type that in. And so now, only when Mumford and Juju, and then that one Sun, so I was just too slow in my typing there. But it's only going to make this request now when the search term changes, and that's exactly what we want. And you know what? If your request, the only reason that this is true is because our request cares, like it actually uses. Yep. Okay, and I'll do that as well, right? So the only reason that we depend on term is because we need to use it in our search. You will likely do requests a lot of the time where you don't need any parameters. You don't depend on anything. You only need to do it once when the thing loads. Well, if we did not have this dependency, then I would have an empty dependency list. So with your project, when you start working on Interview Scheduler and you make your request, you're going to do it once when the application component loads. So you'll need a dependency list that is empty, so it only happens when it loads. There's no canceling or cleanup that we're going to do, so don't worry about that right now. We're just going to fire the side effect. When the state changes, we will update the days, the appointments, the interviewers. This is the state that exists at the top level of your application by this point. And then that's going to cause the application to re-render, and then it won't make that API call again, unless you refreshed it.
If for some reason you make a request that keeps running forever, and then you change the term, is that going to cancel that request and run a new one?
No, you would have to. So you would have to. I don't know exactly how Axios does it because I haven't used Axios for this before. But you might get some like result or something like some or handler or something for this. I don't know. I don't know exactly how they do it. They might. They say that they're cancelable, right? They say that the Axios requests are cancelable. So what you would need to do is return a function that did something like Axios.cancel or whatever. I don't know exactly what they do, but I would have to have a cleanup function for that, because in that case, I type the term. Well, the next time someone does a search, it should clean up that request before it does the next one. It should cancel that request before it does the next one. And what this thing is saying is that all cleanup functions get run before the next effects get run. So in that case, if the cleanup contains the canceling of our request, then it would do that before it ran the next one. No. Okay. So that doesn't have a cleanup, but these ones do. That's a cleanup right there, right? Remember? Yeah. We loaded the component. We pressed keys. So it added the event listeners once. We were in the update state, so we pressed keys. And then when we clicked on another component to load in Storybook, it unmounted our component, which means it would call this cleanup function here. And then now we don't have event listeners anymore. So yeah, this is, I guess, the example of that. Yeah. Are we done? Yeah? OK. I also thought maybe, here, I'll just stop this. It's not part of. I also thought